Hey guys, tonight we ride straight into a winter night that does not care about your confidence, your plans, or the fact that you thought the American frontier sounded kind of romantic from a warm couch. You're out there now, boots stiff with cold, breath puffing white into a sky so wide it almost feels like it's leaning down to watch you struggle. The sun has slipped away fast, too fast, and the open plains are already trading color for shadow, gold for steel blue. Somewhere behind you, the last fence post is miles back. Ahead of you, there's only wind, grass flattened by frost, and the long dark hours you have to survive before morning shows mercy again. This is where winter really introduces itself, not with snowflakes in a postcard way, but with a creeping cold that slides into your joints and quietly asks how serious you are about staying alive. You probably won't survive this if you think toughness alone is enough. That's the reality check nobody put on the dime novels. Out here, bravado freezes faster than water. Survival is smaller, quieter, more methodical. It's knowing when to stop riding before sweat turns dangerous, when to accept discomfort instead of chasing comfort, when to listen to your horse instead of your pride. And before we get too deep into the dark, here's your gentle modern interruption. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments too. It's strangely comforting to know where everyone is listening from while you're mentally freezing out here with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You keep riding as long as the light lets you, because winter nights on the plains aren't something you rush into unless you have to. Cowboys learned quickly that the horizon lies in winter. It promises openness and delivers exposure. As the temperature drops, the land seems to flatten even more, offering nowhere to hide from wind that scours heat straight off your skin. One mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. Many cattle drives and range operations slowed or stopped entirely in winter, not because the men lacked grit, but because open plain exposure made sustained travel genuinely lethal. When you hear that, it reframes the silence around you. This isn't emptiness, it's risk made visible. You're scanning for any sign that might break the wind, maybe a shallow draw, a stand of scrubby cottonwood hugging a frozen creek, even a low rise that can give your bedroll a little mercy. Historians still argue whether cowboys preferred creek bottoms or higher ground for winter bedding, because both had trade-offs. Valleys sheltered you from wind but could trap colder air, while higher ground stayed breezier but sometimes drier. Tonight, theory doesn't matter as much as instinct. You feel the cold pooling low, seeping upward like invisible water, and you angle towards slightly higher ground, trusting the feel in your bones more than any rule. The first stars punch through the twilight, sharp and unsympathetic. With no city glow to soften them, they look close enough to snag on your hat brim. That sky is both comfort and threat. Clear nights often mean colder temperatures, and you know it even if you don't have a thermometer. Cowboys didn't need numbers, they read weather by sound and sensation. The way the wind drops suddenly, the way your horse's coat fluffs and its breathing slows. You swing down from the saddle stiffly, feeling how fast warmth leaves your body once movement stops. This is one of those small lessons winter teaches over and over. Stopping is dangerous if you're not ready for it. You work quickly but not frantically because panic wastes heat. The routine matters. Untack the horse, rub it down just enough to keep sweat from freezing, then let it graze what brittle grass it can find. A quirky but true tidbit drifts in here. Some cowboys believed horses could sense incoming weather shifts hours before humans, and many trusted a restless or unusually calm horse as a better forecast than the sky itself. Whether that's instinct or coincidence is still debated, but tonight you watch your horse closely anyway, because companionship on the plains is also information. The dark thickens. Sound travels strangely now. A distant coyote call feels uncomfortably close, stretched thin across the frozen air. Your own movements sound louder than they should, the scrape of a boot, the creak of leather. You're aware of how alone you are, but also how exposed. The plains don't offer the cozy menace of a forest. They offer a clean, uninterrupted line between you and whatever might come. That openness messes with your head. Cowboys wrote later about winter nights being less frightening because of predators and more because of thoughts, long, looping reflections amplified by cold and fatigue. Lying awake, your mind becomes another element to manage. You choose your spot carefully and start setting up for the night, hands already clumsy. This is where winter survival quietly begins, not with heroics but with decisions made while fingers still work. You know from experience, or from the hard-won wisdom passed down, that sweating now is a mistake you'll pay for later. You move just enough to stay warm, not enough to soak your shirt. That balance is razor thin, and winter loves to punish anyone who misjudges it. As you unroll your bedroll, the ground beneath it feels like stone. The earth has surrendered its daytime warmth completely. Some cowboys swore by piling grass or brush beneath their blankets to add insulation, while others argued it invited dampness and pests. Historians still argue whether insulation or dryness mattered more on the plains, but you hedge your bets, adding just enough dry grass to lift you off the frozen soil without turning your bed into a sponge. These aren't glamorous choices, but they are the difference between discomfort and danger. The wind nudges at you, testing. You turn your back to it instinctively, hunching your shoulders as you settle in. The cold isn't dramatic, it's persistent. It doesn't stab, it leeches. That's the thing nobody tells you up front. Winter nights on the plains don't usually kill with a single moment. They wear you down, minute by minute, until mistakes feel tempting and shortcuts feel reasonable. You fight that by slowing down, by treating each small task as important because it is. Above you, the Milky Way stretches like a pale scar across the sky. It's beautiful in a way that almost hurts, and that beauty is part of the danger. It makes you feel small, which can either calm you or unmoor you. Cowboys often spoke of the night sky as both companion and judge, a reminder that endurance mattered more than ego. You pull your hat lower, tuck your chin, and breathe slowly, matching your rhythm to the quiet around you. There's a moment, right before full darkness settles in, when you realize this is it. No cabin, no stove, no walls, just you, your horse, and the choices you've already made. And strangely, that realization brings a thin thread of calm. The night hasn't beaten you yet. You've prepared, you've paid attention. Winter is here, yes, but you're still standing, still thinking, still warm enough for now. And as the stars sharpen and the plains go fully dark, you begin the long, patient work of surviving until morning. Section the cold creeps in first at the seams. You feel it where sleeve meets glove, where collar gaps just enough to remind you that clothing out here isn't fashion, it's architecture. Your body is the fire you're trying to shelter, and every layer you wear is a wall, a roof, or sometimes a leaky window. Cowboys figured this out fast, usually the hard way. Winter on the open plains didn't forgive bad wardrobe choices, and it certainly didn't care how tough you thought you were. You shift slightly in your bedroll now, testing how well you've sealed yourself in, aware that the night is still young and the temperature hasn't hit its lowest point yet. Wool is doing most of the heavy lifting. There's a reason it shows up again and again in historical accounts, journals, and photographs. One mainstream historical fact anchors this reality. Wool retains heat even when damp, which made it vastly superior to cotton on the frontier. You might be wearing a wool shirt, maybe another layer beneath, and a heavy coat on top that smells faintly of smoke, horse, and old weather. It's not clean, but clean doesn't matter. Warm matters. Dry matters more. Every cowboy learned that sweating into cotton was an invitation to misery once the sun dropped. You think about how each piece came to be on your body, often through trial, error, and hand-me-down wisdom. Long johns, sometimes wool, sometimes a rougher blend, hug your legs. Over them, trousers thick enough to block wind but loose enough not to cut circulation. Circulation is everything now. Too tight, and your toes and fingers go numb faster. Too loose, and the wind sneaks in like it's been waiting for permission. You flex your feet inside your boots, checking for that familiar ache that warns you not to ignore them for too long. Boots are their own gamble. Leather stiffens in the cold and moisture turns them into slow traps. Cowboys stuffed newspaper, spare cloth, even grass inside boots at night to keep them from freezing solid by morning. A quirky tidbit floats through your thoughts. Some cowboys slept with their boots inside their bedroll, using body heat to keep them pliable. Others swore this was miserable and preferred risking frozen leather over sharing warmth with something that smelled like weeks of travel. Historians still argue whether keeping boots warm overnight was worth the discomfort, because accounts vary wildly. Tonight you compromise, pulling them close enough to share some heat without fully embracing the stink. Your coat creaks softly as you adjust it, leather or heavy canvas layered over wool. It's scarred with old marks, each one a memory of weather survived. You're not wearing it because it looks good. You're wearing it because it blocks wind, because it's thick enough to slow heat loss, because it's familiar. Familiarity matters when the dark presses in. You pull it tighter, then loosen it just a bit, careful not to trap moisture. Winter survival is full of these small contradictions. Your hat stays on. That's non-negotiable. Heat rises, and you can feel how much escapes when your head is uncovered. A wide-brimmed felt hat isn't just for sun. It's a shield against cold air sliding down your neck. You tug it low and smile faintly at the thought that something so iconic actually earns its place tonight. There's a quiet satisfaction in using things the way they were meant to be used. Your hands are next. Gloves, mittens if you're lucky, are thick and awkward. Fine tasks become clumsy negotiations. Buttons fight back. Knots take longer, but bare hands aren't an option. Frostbite doesn't announce itself with drama. It numbs, it whispers, it convinces you everything's fine until it is. Cowboys learned to watch their hands the way sailors watched the sea. Pale skin, stiffness, that waxy feeling, those were warnings. You clench and unclench your fingers slowly, keeping blood moving, reminding them they still belong to you. Scarves are underrated heroes. A strip of wool wrapped around your neck and lower face can mean the difference between manageable cold and relentless misery. You pull yours up, breathing through fabric that's already damp with condensation. It's not pleasant, but it warms the air before it hits your lungs. Cowboys talked about breathing through cloth to prevent chest pain in extreme cold, a practical trick passed along without fuss. You do it now without thinking, grateful for every small mercy. As the night deepens, you become hyper-aware of how stillness drains heat. Even layered, even prepared, you can feel warmth slowly leaking away. You shift position, roll a shoulder, bend a knee. Movement just enough. Not exercise, not restlessness, maintenance. Historians still argue whether cowboys slept deeply on winter nights or drifted in and out of shallow rest, waking often to adjust clothing or position. Listening to your own body now, you suspect the latter. Deep sleep feels like a luxury reserved for softer seasons. There's a mental component to layering too. Knowing you've done what you can brings a fragile calm. Panic tightens muscles and speeds heat loss. You remind yourself that discomfort doesn't equal danger. Not yet. The cold bites, yes, but it hasn't crossed into something worse. That line matters, and experienced cowboys learned to sense it intuitively, long before medical terms existed for hypothermia. They talked about the bad cold, the kind that made thinking fuzzy and decisions sloppy. You stay alert for that, using clarity itself as a survival tool. You remember stories shared around campfires about men who underestimated winter nights. Not fools, just unlucky or tired or overly confident. A jacket left open, wet socks ignored, a rest taken too long. These stories weren't told to scare, they were told to instruct. Tonight they echo softly as you check your socks, wriggling toes to ensure they're still responsive, dry enough, warm enough, for now. The wind shifts again, testing your layers from a new angle. You adjust instinctively, turning your body, tucking fabric where it needs to be tucked. This dance between you and the elements goes on quietly, hour after hour. There's no winning, only holding ground. And in that effort, you begin to understand something fundamental. Clothing isn't passive. It's active participation in survival. Every choice you made before sunset, what to wear, what to pack, what to repair, has led to this moment. Somewhere in the dark, your horse shifts too, hooves crunching softly. Its coat is thick, designed by nature for this very thing. You envy it briefly, then refocus. Humans didn't evolve for open plains winters, they adapted. Layer by layer, habit by habit. Tonight you are part of that long experiment, wrapped in wool and leather, breathing steadily into a scarf, waiting for the night to reveal its full weight. The cold settles deeper, but so do you. Each layer holds. Each adjustment helps. You're not comfortable, but you're surviving. And on the open plains in winter, that's the real measure of success. At some point, the idea of fire starts tapping at your thoughts like a persistent knock. Not because it promises comfort. Fire out here is rarely cozy, but because it feels like control. A small, flickering rebellion against all this cold indifference. You sit up slightly in your bedroll and scan the darkness again, judging wind direction, terrain, and how much energy you're willing to spend. Fire is never free. It costs time, calories, attention. On the open plains, it also carries risk, because the same wind that steals heat can scatter sparks and erase your work in seconds. One mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. On the treeless plains, cowboys often went nights without a fire simply because fuel was scarce or non-existent. This wasn't a dramatic test of toughness, it was logistics. No wood, no fire, period. Sometimes dried buffalo chips, yes, actual dried bison dung, served as fuel, burning slowly with surprising steadiness. It sounds ridiculous now, but it worked, and it worked well enough to become part of frontier survival lore. Tonight, you scan the ground half hopeful, half resigned, knowing that if you find any, you'll use it without hesitation. You rise carefully, layering movement on top of intention. Standing too fast bleeds heat. You move into the wind slightly, because sparks behave better when you know where the air wants to go. Your hands work clumsily through gloves as you gather what little fuel you can. Scraps of wood carried along in your kit. A broken fence slat scavenged miles back. Maybe a handful of those sun-bleached dung chips if luck is on your side. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some cowboys prefer dung fires because they produced less visible flame and smoke, reducing the risk of spooking cattle or drawing unwanted attention. Historians still argue whether discretion or desperation drove that preference, but either way, it shaped nightly routines like this one. You crouch low, using your body as a windbreak. Knees ache, back protests. You ignore it. Fire demands patience, not strength. Striking a match in cold air is a negotiation. The first one sputters. The second catches, flaring briefly before you shield it and coax it down into kindling. You breathe shallowly, aware that every breath fogs the space you're trying to warm. The flame hesitates, then commits, licking upward in a thin, hopeful line. There's a moment of relief when it holds, not joy relief. Firelight changes the night instantly, shrinking the darkness into something manageable. Shadows jump. Your breath looks less lonely in the glow. You hold your hands out, palms angled just right, warming skin without sweating. That balance again. Always that balance. Cowboys learn to treat fire like medicine, enough to help, too much to hurt. Sweat near freezing temperatures is a slow betrayal. You don't build a bonfire, that's for stories and movies. You build something modest, something you can tend without constant panic. Low flame, low profile. The wind nudges it, testing its resolve, and you adjust stones or scrape a shallow pit to protect it. This is where experience speaks louder than words. Every cowboy developed their own fire habits, shaped by region, weather, and hard lessons. Some trusted fire deeply, others avoided it unless absolutely necessary. You fall somewhere in the middle, using it as a tool, not a crutch. As the fire settles, your senses recalibrate. The crackle is sharp in the stillness. The smell, earthy, slightly acrid, cuts through cold air. You sip from a tin cup warmed near the edge, not too close. Coffee, if you have it, tastes thinner than usual, but it's hot, and that's enough. Historically, coffee was more than comfort. It was stimulation, a way to stay alert during long, dangerous nights. Cowboys drank it strong and often, sometimes to their own detriment. Historians still argue whether caffeine helped or hurt winter survival, since staying awake prevented dangerous sleep, but exhaustion carried its own risks. You watch the fire carefully, knowing that attention is part of the price. Letting it die too soon wastes effort. Letting it rage wastes fuel. There's a rhythm to tending it, a slow feeding that mirrors your breathing. The warmth seeps into your gloves, easing stiffness just enough to remind you what your fingers are supposed to feel like. You don't linger too long. Lingering invites sweat. You pull back before comfort turns careless. The plains beyond the firelight remain vast and unknowable. You're aware that fire announces you, even if only to animals. Coyotes keep their distance, curious but cautious. Your horse flicks an ear toward the glow, then settles again. Some cowboys tied their horses farther away from fires, believing the light unsettled them. Others kept them close for shared warmth and reassurance. Historians still argue which practice reduced risk more, but tonight you trust proximity. The quiet presence of another living thing steadies you. The fire also pulls thoughts out of hiding. Memories surface, stories you've heard of nights when fire saved lives, and nights when it nearly ended them. Sparks caught bedrolls. Wind flipped flames into grass. Smoke lulled tired men into deeper, colder sleep. You respect the flame because you've learned that respect is survival's currency. Arrogance burns faster than fuel. As fuel dwindles, you face a choice. Feed the fire and commit to tending it through the night, or let it fade and conserve energy. There's no universal answer. Conditions decide. Tonight, the wind is steady but manageable. The cold is biting but not murderous. You choose moderation. You feed the fire just enough to take the edge off, then let it sink low, glowing rather than blazing. A bed of embers offers psychological comfort even when physical warmth is minimal. Eventually, you ease back into your bedroll, firelight dancing weakly across the inside of your eyelids. You keep your face turned slightly toward the glow, absorbing what warmth you can without abandoning your layers. The fire becomes a quiet companion, something to glance at when the night feels too large. You listen for changes, the hiss of wind, the pop of shifting fuel ready to intervene if needed. And then gradually the fire does what all fires do. It diminishes. Flames retreat. Embers dull. You watch until the glow is barely there, then turn inward, pulling clothing tighter, letting your body resume its careful heat economy. Fire helped, but it didn't solve everything. It never does. On the open plains, winter nights are survived by accumulation. Layers, habits, decisions stacked carefully against the cold. As darkness fully reclaims the space, you realize something quietly important. Fire isn't about defeating the night. It's about negotiating with it. A brief conversation in warmth and light, after which the night resumes its long, cold watch. You breathe steadily, accept the terms, and settle back into endurance mode, knowing you've used one of your tools wisely, and that many more hours remain. When the fire finally slips into memory, the ground reasserts itself. You feel it through every layer, cold, unyielding, patient. This is where sleep becomes less about rest and more about positioning, because on winter plains nights, how you lie matters almost as much as what you wear. Cowboys didn't talk about beds so much as arrangements, temporary truces between body, earth, and weather. You shift onto your side, then onto your back, testing where heat lingers longest, where pressure eases, where the wind sneaks in. One mainstream historical fact settles in here. Most cowboys slept on the ground using a bedroll made of blankets or quilts, often wrapped in oilcloth or canvas to block moisture. Mattresses were fantasies reserved for towns. The saddle, ironically, often became part of the sleeping system. You drag it close now, not because it's comfortable, it isn't, but because it's shaped, solid, and familiar. Propped just right, it breaks the wind at your back or props your shoulders so blood keeps moving. You wedge the saddle near your torso, sliding an arm through the stirrup leather absent-mindedly. It's a habit passed down without explanation. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some cowboys believed sleeping with a hand through the reins or stirrup ensured they'd wake instantly if the horse spooked. Others said it was pure superstition, more about comfort than control. Historians still argue whether this practice actually improved response times or simply made men feel less alone. Tonight, you don't analyze it. You just do it, because habits born of survival don't require justification. The bedroll smells like long days, dust, smoke, sweat dried and re-dried. It's stiff in places where moisture once froze. You shake it out as best you can, fluffing trapped air back into the blankets. Air is insulation, and even cowboys who couldn't name the science understood the principle intuitively. A flattened blanket is a useless blanket. You layer carefully, one beneath you to block the earth, one over you to trap heat. If you have a third, it goes over your shoulders because that's where the cold seems to settle hardest. You lie still for a moment, letting your body decide what hurts most, Hips protest. Knees complain. Shoulders ache from hours in the saddle. There's no perfect position, only tolerable ones. Cowboys learned to accept discomfort as the baseline, not the exception. Winter amplified everything: old injuries, fatigue, doubt. You breathe through it, reminding yourself that movement will come again soon enough. Sleep, when it arrives, is light and fragmented. Historians still argue whether cowboys actually slept in long stretches during winter or existed in cycles of dozing and waking. Listening to your own mind now, you suspect the latter. You drift for minutes at a time, then surface, checking warmth, checking sound, checking your horse. This half-sleep is exhausting in its own way, but it keeps you alive. Deep sleep belongs to safe places. The plains are honest about that. You tuck your hat lower, pulling it down until the brim almost brushes your nose. Breath warms the space inside, creating a small pocket of tolerable air. Some cowboys wrapped scarves around their faces completely, breathing through layers until dawn. Others avoided it, worried about dampness freezing fabric stiff. Historians still argue which method reduced heat loss more effectively, but tonight you compromise again, adjusting when moisture builds, shifting when cold creeps back. Saddle presses against your side, not painfully, just enough to remind you it's there. It blocks a ribbon of wind and offers something solid to lean into. There's comfort in solidity. You imagine how many nights this piece of gear has spent outdoors, absorbing weather, surviving alongside you. It's a quiet partnership forged through repetition. Your horse shifts again, hooves crunching softly. That sound has become a marker of time. As long as it's there, steady and unpanicked, you can relax just a little. Cowboys often said they slept better when they could hear their horses breathing. It meant nothing unexpected was moving. It meant the world was, for the moment, stable. The cold continues its slow negotiation with your body. Feet first, they're always first. You curl them slightly, pressing them together, creating friction, creating warmth. You check your socks again with a small flex, still responsive. Good. Hands come next. You tuck them into armpits or between thighs, sharing heat where it's strongest. These gestures are instinctive now, as natural as breathing. Thoughts wander in the dark. You think about mornings after nights like this, how the first movement feels brutal, how fingers ache as circulation returns, how gratitude floods in when the sun finally breaks the horizon. That future moment becomes something to hold onto. Winter nights are endured forward minute by minute, but they're survived backward, with dawn as the promise that makes patience possible. A light joke drifts through your mind, half-conscious. Whoever decided the ground was a reasonable place to sleep clearly never met winter. You almost smile, then stop yourself because smiling exposes teeth to cold air and makes your face ache. Lesson learned. You shift again, finding a slightly better angle. The wind slides over you instead of under. Small victory. Cowboys counted these. They mattered. You settle, breathe slowly, and let another shallow sleep take you. Not rest, exactly, but reprieve. Somewhere between waking and drifting, you realize something subtle has changed. The cold hasn't eased, but your resistance to it has strengthened. Your body has adapted to the conditions you gave it. That adaptation is fragile, temporary, but real. It's the result of choices layered carefully against the night: clothing, fire, positioning, patience. You remain there, wrapped in canvas and wool, anchored by saddle leather and habit, listening to the plains breathe around you. Winter hasn't won. Not tonight. Not yet. Sometime deep in the night, your awareness narrows until it revolves around one other living presence: the horse. You don't need to look to know where it is. You can feel it in the rhythm of the night, the soft shift of weight, the quiet exhale, the occasional stamp of a hoof against frozen ground. Out here, the horse isn't transportation. It's an early warning system, a heat source by proxy, and sometimes the difference between a miserable night and a deadly one. One mainstream historical fact grounds this bond. Cowboys depended on their horses for survival year-round, but in winter the relationship became even more critical, because a horse could detect predators, storms, and terrain changes faster than a human on foot. You angle your body slightly toward it now, not close enough to crowd, but near enough to share presence. Horses generate a surprising amount of heat, and even a few feet of proximity can take the edge off the cold. You listen carefully. A relaxed horse sounds different from a tense one. Breathing is slow. Movements are economical. When something feels wrong, that changes. Cowboys learned this language the same way they learned weather, by paying attention. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some cowboys believed a horse would intentionally turn its hindquarters toward the wind at night, creating a natural windbreak for its rider. Historians still argue whether this behavior was deliberate or coincidental, but many men swore by positioning themselves accordingly. Tonight, you notice your horse angled just so, and you don't question the gift. You resist the urge to fuss. Overhandling a horse in winter can do more harm than good. Too much movement leads to sweat, and sweat freezes. You remember being taught to rub down a horse just enough after riding, then leave it be. Its winter coat is built for this. Nature did most of the work long before you arrived on the plains with your bedroll and ideas. The night carries sound differently now. Wind ebbs, then rises. Somewhere far off, a coyote laughs, the sound thin and sharp. Your horse flicks an ear but doesn't spook. That tells you more than any thought process could. You relax a fraction, letting your shoulders drop. Cowboys often trusted their horses' reactions more than their own instincts, especially in the dark. Humans imagined threats. Horses read them. You think about how dangerous it would be to lose the horse tonight. A broken tether, a sudden fright, a bolt into the dark. On the open plains in winter, that could mean walking miles in lethal cold or waiting helplessly for daylight. This awareness sharpens your listening. You keep your bedroll oriented so you can rise quickly if needed, boots within reach, reins accessible. This isn't anxiety, it's readiness. Historians still argue whether cowboys slept better near their horses or worse, torn between comfort and responsibility. Lying here now, you understand both sides. The closeness reassures you, but it also keeps you alert. Every sound is filtered through the question, is that normal? Most of the time the answer is yes. Grass shifting, leather creaking, hooves settling. These become the background music of endurance. At one point the horse stamps harder than usual, cracking the crust of frost. You're awake instantly, heart thumping. You wait, seconds stretch. Then the horse lowers its head again and resumes grazing, probably a patch of ice or irritation at the cold. You let your breath slow, the surge of adrenaline ebbing. Nights like this teach you the difference between fear and vigilance. Fear drains, vigilance sustains. There's warmth in the routine of checking without touching. You don't rise unless necessary. Energy is currency. Cowboys rationed it carefully, especially in winter. Every unnecessary movement burned calories you couldn't easily replace. You pull your coat tighter instead, trusting the systems you've set up. You think about the unspoken contract between you and the horse. You feed it, guide it, protect it as best you can. In return, it carries you, warms you indirectly, and keeps watch when you can't. That partnership shaped the entire culture of cowboying more than any weapon or tool. Out here, alone on a frozen plain, the romance strips away and what remains is mutual dependence. A light joke drifts in, just enough to soften the edge. If this horse decides to judge your life choices tonight, it's keeping those thoughts to itself. You almost smile again, then settle, conserving heat. Humor helps, but warmth is still king. The wind picks up briefly, pushing sound and cold together. Your horse shifts its stance, leaning into it. You instinctively mirror the move, rolling slightly so your back is better shielded. It feels coordinated even if it's coincidence. Historians still argue how much human and horse behavior synchronized through experience versus chance, but when it works, it feels intentional. Time stretches. Minutes blur. Your awareness floats between sleep and watchfulness. The horse's presence anchors you, a steady point in a vast, dark landscape. You realize that without it, the night would feel far more hostile. With it, the plains feel at least negotiable. Eventually, fatigue pulls you deeper into rest. Not deep sleep, never that, but something close enough to let your mind quiet. The horse continues its patient work, grazing, listening, enduring. Together, you hold the line against winter, side by side, waiting for the first hint of morning. Hunger arrives quietly, sliding in alongside the cold like an accomplice. You don't feel it as a sharp ache so much as a dull drain, a sense that the fire inside you needs refueling. Winter nights teach this lesson relentlessly. Warmth is not just layered on the outside, it's generated from within. Calories are fuel, and without them, all the wool in the world starts to feel thin. One mainstream historical fact anchors this reality. Frontier diets during cattle work leaned heavily on high-calorie, shelf-stable foods, beans, bacon, hardtack, coffee, because they were portable, durable, and dense enough to keep a working body functioning in harsh conditions. You reach for what you've got now, fingers stiff but obedient. A tin of beans, maybe already cooked earlier in the day. A strip or two of bacon saved carefully, fat and salt both precious. Food out here isn't variety, it's strategy. You sit up just enough to eat without spilling, mindful of posture so you don't dump heat straight into the night. Eating while lying flat is tempting but sloppy. You compromise, propping yourself with the saddle again, using it as a table of sorts. The metal of the tin is cold against your gloves, biting even through fabric. You turn it in your hands, warming it slowly, because cold food pulls heat from you before it gives anything back. Beans taste different at night, earthier, heavier. Each bite settles like a brick in your stomach, and that's a good thing. Slow digestion means slow, steady heat. Cowboys didn't talk about metabolism, but they understood outcomes. A full belly carried you through hours when movement stopped. A light meal might feel fine at sunset, but by midnight it left you shivering and irritable. You eat deliberately, not rushing, because haste wastes both food and warmth. Coffee follows if you've got it. Strong, bitter. Comforting in a way that's half psychological. Cowboys drank coffee constantly, and not just for alertness. Hot liquid warms the core, even briefly, and that warmth feels miraculous when the rest of the world is frozen. Historians still argue whether constant coffee consumption helped winter survival or simply masked exhaustion, but nobody debates its popularity. You sip carefully, mindful of spills. Wet clothing now would be a quiet disaster. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you chew. Some cowboys carried a small lump of bacon grease in their pockets, using it not just for cooking but as an emergency calorie boost, eaten straight when conditions turned brutal. It sounds unappetizing, and it is, but fat is energy and energy is heat. Survival has a way of redefining what counts as appetizing. You glance at your own supplies, silently grateful you're not down to grease alone. The smell of food drifts briefly into the night, then dissipates. It's comforting, but it also sharpens your awareness. Smell carries, animals notice. You don't linger longer than necessary. The plains are quiet, but quiet doesn't mean empty. You pack things away efficiently, tucking scraps where they won't attract attention or freeze solid by morning. As the food settles, you feel a subtle shift. Not warmth exactly, but resilience. The shiver that had been flirting with your spine retreats. Your breathing steadies. This is the part nobody romanticizes. The way survival depends on digestion doing its slow, unglamorous work. Cowboys often joke that winter was won or lost in the stomach, and lying here now, you get it. You pull your bedroll tighter and let the calories do their thing. Heat blooms gradually like embers catching under ash. It's not dramatic, but it's reliable. You think about mornings when men skipped breakfast to save time, only to regret it by noon. Winter punished shortcuts harshly. Eating enough felt indulgent sometimes, but it was maintenance, not luxury. Historians still argue how much protein versus fat cowboys actually consumed on winter nights, because diaries vary and memory is slippery. Some accounts emphasize meat-heavy meals, others mention beans and bread as staples. The truth likely shifted with supply and circumstance. Tonight, your meal is simple, repetitive, effective. That's enough. You notice how your horse grazes more deliberately now too, crunching frozen grass with steady persistence. It's fueling itself the same way you are, preparing for hours of cold still ahead. There's a strange comfort in that parallel. Different diets, same goal, endure until dawn. Your thoughts slow as warmth spreads. Food has that effect, softening edges. You allow yourself a small joke in the quiet. Whoever invented beans probably didn't expect them to be a winter survival tool, but here you are, deeply grateful. Humor keeps the mind from spiraling, and spirals waste energy. The wind shifts again, but this time it feels less aggressive. Or maybe you're just better prepared. It's hard to tell. Winter nights blur cause and effect. What you do know is that you're warmer than you were an hour ago, and that matters. You settle back down, placing empty tins where you won't trip over them later. You flex your toes, feeling improved responsiveness. Good sign. Hands feel less wooden too. You tuck them in, sharing that renewed warmth with colder parts of your body. This redistribution becomes second nature, a quiet internal logistics operation. As you drift toward shallow sleep again, you think about how survival is cumulative. Clothing, fire, bedding, horse, food, none of it works alone. Each piece supports the others, and failure in one area strains the rest. Cowboys learned this system's thinking without ever naming it. Nights like this were their teachers. Your stomach is full. Your core is warmer. The cold is still there, pressing in, but it's met with resistance now. You breathe slowly, letting the steady rhythm carry you. Dawn is still a long way off, but you've bought yourself time. And on Winter Plains nights, time is the most valuable thing you can earn. Sleep never fully claims you. Instead, the night trains your ears, sharpening them until every sound feels deliberate. Out here, listening is a form of labor. You lie still, wrapped tight, eyes closed but attention wide, cataloging noises the way a librarian sorts books. Wind through grass, the faint crackle of frozen earth, your horse's breathing. Each sound has a place. Anything new gets flagged immediately. One mainstream historical fact grounds this vigilance. On the open plains, sound travels farther and clearer at night, especially in cold air, which carries vibrations more efficiently than warm air. Cowboys learned to rely on hearing as much as sight after dark, because the horizon offered no visual clues once the light vanished. You experience that now. A noise miles away can feel uncomfortably close, and your brain has to decide, threat or nothing, without much help. A coyote calls again, closer this time. The sound skitters across the dark, high and mocking. Your body tightens automatically. Coyotes aren't the real danger, and you know it, but the sound triggers something older than logic. Cowboys often wrote that predators themselves were rarely the problem. It was the uncertainty they brought with them. Historians still argue whether fear of animals was exaggerated in frontier storytelling, but lying here now, you understand how sound alone could keep men awake for hours. You wait for your horse's reaction. That's the rule. The horse shifts an ear, then resumes grazing. No alarm. You let your muscles loosen again. This call and response between you and the animal becomes your nightly conversation. It's efficient. It saves energy. It keeps you sane. The plains amplify loneliness in strange ways. Silence isn't empty, it's heavy. It presses in until your own breathing feels too loud. Cowboys talked about the listening dark, a state where every pause feels loaded with meaning. You feel it now, that sense that something might happen simply because nothing has yet. It's exhausting mentally, and winter makes it worse by stretching the night into something that feels endless. To counter that, you ground yourself in routine. You count breaths. You flex fingers and toes in a slow sequence. You listen to familiar sounds and name them silently. Grass, wind, horse. This is a trick passed down informally, a way to keep fear from spiraling. Historians still argue how much of cowboy survival knowledge was formal instruction versus shared habit, but nights like this suggest habit mattered more. A quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts. Some cowboys claimed they could tell the difference between wind-driven grass and an approaching animal purely by rhythm. Grass moves in waves. Animals interrupt patterns. Whether that's true or the product of long nights and imagination is debated, but you find yourself testing it anyway, listening for breaks in cadence. At one point you hear something that doesn't fit, a soft crunch, distinct. Your eyes snap open. You hold your breath, counting seconds. The sound comes again, then stops. Your heart thumps loud in your ears. You glance toward the horse, straining to see its silhouette. It lifts its head, pauses, then lowers it again. Probably another animal passing wide. Probably nothing. Probably. You force yourself to relax because staying tense burns warmth fast. Fear costs calories. Cowboys learned that too. Panic made men colder, faster, and more likely to make mistakes. You remind yourself that you've prepared. You're layered, you're fed, you're not helpless. This isn't bravado, it's inventory. Taking stock steadies the mind. The wind shifts, and with it the soundscape rearranges. What was loud fades. What was distant sharpens. You notice how even the cold has a sound, a faint, dry hiss as it slides across fabric and grass. Winter nights teach you to hear temperature, not just weather. That awareness becomes oddly soothing. Familiarity replaces fear. Your thoughts wander briefly to towns, to rooms with walls and doors, to how strange it is that people complain about silence while sleeping indoors. Out here, silence is an active force. You almost laugh at that contrast, catching yourself before the movement wastes heat. A light joke settles instead. If the planes wanted privacy, they wouldn't echo so much. Gradually, vigilance softens into acceptance. You can't listen for everything forever. At some point, trust becomes necessary. Cowboys balance this constantly, alert enough to respond, relaxed enough to rest. Historians still argue whether this balance was learned quickly or only after mistakes, but either way, it shaped frontier psychology deeply. You let your eyes close again, ears still open but no longer straining. The sounds blend back into a single, textured quiet. The night hasn't revealed any new threats. For now, it's just cold and time. You breathe slowly, letting the rhythm pull you toward shallow sleep once more, knowing you'll wake again soon enough. Listening doesn't stop, but it recedes, becoming background rather than command. And in that narrow window, wrapped in wool and patience, you rest, just enough to keep going. The weather changes without asking permission. That's the first lie the plains ever told you, that what you see at sunset will still be true by midnight. You wake from another shallow drift of sleep with the uneasy sense that something has shifted. Not sound this time, pressure. The air feels heavier, thicker, as if the night has leaned closer. You inhale slowly, testing it, and notice the wind has dropped almost completely. That should feel like relief. Instead, it makes your stomach tight. One mainstream historical fact anchors this instinct. Sudden weather changes were among the greatest dangers cowboys faced on the open plains, especially in winter, when blizzards could form rapidly with little warning. Without modern forecasts, men relied on subtle cues. Barometric pressure felt in the ears, wind behavior, cloud movement earlier in the day. You didn't see clouds at sunset, but clear skies can be deceptive. Clear skies can be traps. Stillness unnerves you more than the wind did. Wind, at least, is honest. It tells you what direction trouble might come from. Still air holds secrets. You listen again, but the soundscape has flattened. Even the grass has gone quiet, its whisper muted. Your horse has stopped grazing and stands with its head raised, body angled in a way that wasn't there before. That gets your attention immediately. You don't panic. Panic wastes warmth and time. You sit up slightly, muscles stiff, and scan the horizon. There's nothing to see, just darkness pressed against darkness, but you trust the unease anyway. Cowboys learned that weather didn't always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it arrived politely, then stayed to kill you. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you assess the night. Some cowboys believed they could smell snow before it fell, a sharp, metallic tang in the air. Scientists still debate whether humans can truly detect approaching snowfall or if it's psychological, but many frontier accounts mention the sensation. You breathe in carefully. The air does feel different, cleaner somehow, tighter in your lungs. You begin small adjustments. You pull your bedroll tighter, sealing gaps. You shift your saddle slightly to improve wind blocking from a direction you're not fully convinced about yet. You make sure your hat is secure, scarf positioned to protect your face. These are low-cost moves, hedges against uncertainty. Winter survival is often about preparing for what might happen rather than reacting to what already has. Historians still argue how often cowboys were caught completely unaware by blizzards versus how often warning signs were simply ignored or misread. Lying here now, you understand how easy it would be to rationalize the signs away. The human brain loves comfort. It loves to believe that nothing is about to change. The plains punish that optimism. The first hint comes as a whisper, barely perceptible. A faint hiss returns to the air, not quite wind, not quite silence. You feel it more than hear it brushing across your cheek. Snow doesn't roar at first, it sneaks. You squint into the dark, watching for movement against the stars. Then you see it, tiny specks drifting sideways, catching faint starlight before vanishing. You exhale slowly, here it is. Snowfall alone isn't the real danger. Snow combined with wind is. You watch closely, gauging direction, speed, intent. Your horse shifts again, stamping once, then settling with its hindquarters turned toward where the flakes are coming from. You take that cue seriously. Horses don't argue with weather, they accept and adjust. You do the same. You roll your body so your back faces the oncoming snow, letting your layers take the brunt. You lower your head, chin tucked, scarf pulled high. Exposed skin becomes a liability fast. The temperature drops perceptibly, a sudden drain that makes your teeth clench. This is the other lie the plains tell. That cold arrives gradually. Sometimes it falls off a cliff. You consider whether to rise, whether to add movement, whether to rekindle fire. Fire in falling snow is risky. Wind can scatter sparks. Moisture can smother flame. Historians still argue whether cowboys should have relied more heavily on fire during snowstorms or avoided it altogether. Accounts conflict. Some men credited fire with saving them. Others blamed it for disasters. Tonight, you choose caution. Your setup is holding, for now. The snowfall thickens, flakes colliding, swirling unpredictably. Wind returns, low at first, then sharper, pushing cold through every seam it can find. You feel it probing like fingers. You counter by tightening, by angling, by minimizing exposed surface area. This is no longer passive endurance. This is active defense. You think about false thaws too, another weather lie the plains loved. Warm spells that melted snow just enough to soak clothing and ground, followed by sudden freezes that turned everything into ice. Cowboys feared those almost more than blizzards. Wet cold is crueler than dry cold. Tonight at least the snow is dry. That's a small mercy and you cling to it. Your breathing becomes more deliberate. In through the nose, out through fabric. You monitor condensation, adjusting scarf position when it stiffens with frost. This constant micromanagement is exhausting but necessary. Historians still argue how men maintained mental clarity during prolonged exposure to cold, but repetition seems to be the answer. Do the same things in the same order again and again. The horse stands steady, head lowered now, snow dusting its mane. Its coat sheds flakes easily, designed for this. You envy it briefly, then refocus. Envy doesn't warm you. Action does. You reach out and touch the saddle leather, grounding yourself in something solid. The leather is cold but familiar, a reminder that you're not drifting, you're anchored. At one point the wind surges, pushing snow sideways in a sudden rush. Your heart spikes. You tighten instinctively, curling inward, making yourself smaller. This is the posture of survival. Cowboys didn't stand tall in storms. They folded, conserved, waited. Time stretches strangely in snow. Minutes feel longer, sensations blur. You fight that by checking yourself periodically. Fingers, toes, face. You flex, feel, confirm sensation. Still there, still responsive. Good. You whisper numbers in your head, counting, keeping the mind engaged just enough to avoid drifting into dangerous lethargy. A light joke surfaces, almost uninvited. Whoever called this weather was being generous. You don't smile, but the thought helps. Humor cuts through fear like a thin blade, not solving the problem, but giving you something to hold. Eventually, the snow eases slightly, settling into a steadier fall. The wind calms just enough to let you breathe easier. This is another trick the plains play, lulls that tempt you into thinking the worst is over. You don't fall for it. You stay tucked, stay ready, knowing winter loves a second act. Historians still argue how many men misjudged storms because they believed the first easing meant safety. Journals are full of lines like, "We thought it had passed." Those words echo now as warnings, not comfort. You maintain your position, letting the storm decide when it's done. As the hours crawl on, snow piles lightly along the windward side of your bedroll, forming a low drift. You don't fight it immediately. Snow can act as insulation if it doesn't collapse onto you. This is another frontier paradox, using the enemy as a shield. You monitor it carefully, brushing it away when it creeps too close to your face, letting it remain where it blocks wind. Finally, near the edge of exhaustion, you notice a subtle brightening. Not dawn too early, but the sky reflecting snow, turning darkness into a dim gray. The storm is easing its grip, at least for now. You don't relax fully, but you allow a fraction of relief. You've adapted, you've responded, you're still here. The plains lied again, and you didn't believe them. Wrapped in snow-dusted canvas and stubborn patience, you hold on through the worst of it, knowing that winter's most dangerous moments often arrive quietly and leave the same way. When the storm loosens its grip, another truth settles in beside the cold. Warmth multiplies when it's shared. You've spent most of the night proving how much you can endure alone, but winter has a way of interrogating that pride. Out here, independence is admirable until it is. You listen again, not just for weather now, but for human sounds carried faintly across the plains. A cough, a murmur, the scrape of a boot. Companionship changes the math of survival. One mainstream historical fact frames this choice. Cowboys often traveled and worked in small groups, especially during winter operations, because shared labor and shared warmth reduced risk during long, cold nights. Sleeping near others meant pooled body heat, overlapping vigilance, and fewer blind spots. The myth of the lone cowboy survived because it was romantic. The reality survived because it was communal. You feel that tension now, tugging at you like the cold itself. You're not far from another rider tonight, close enough that you could call out if needed, far enough to preserve the illusion of solitude. That distance feels comfortable in fair weather. In winter, it becomes a question mark. You weigh the options quietly. Move closer and trade pride for heat. Stay put and trust your setup. There's no universal answer. The plains don't care which you choose, they'll judge the result. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you consider it. Some cowboys arrange their bedrolls in a rough circle during extreme cold, boots pointed inward, creating a shared pocket of warmer air and mutual awareness. Others refused outright, insisting they slept worse with snoring, shifting bodies, and borrowed smells. Historians still argue whether communal sleeping significantly improved survival rates or simply improved morale. But morale matters more than people admit when conditions grind you down. You test the idea by scooting a little closer, not committing fully yet. The difference is immediate, subtle, but real. The air feels less sharp, sound feels more contained. Even the darkness seems less vast when it's broken by the knowledge of another person breathing nearby. You don't talk much, voices carry, and words aren't necessary, but the presence itself is a form of insulation. Pride flares briefly, just enough to be noticed. You tell yourself you don't need this. You've handled worse alone. That voice sounds convincing until you remember how often winter punished convincing arguments. Cowboys learned that stubbornness and resilience look similar right up until the moment they diverge. You let the pride pass without feeding it. There's a rhythm to shared nights. One of you shifts, the other notices. Someone clears their throat, and the sound is answered by a slight repositioning. It's coordination without planning. You take turns being more awake, more alert, without formal agreement. This is how vigilance spreads naturally among people who have learned to trust one another. Historians still argue whether this kind of unspoken cooperation was instinctive or learned through hard experience. Diaries suggest both. Men wrote about nights when they ignored the option to cluster together, only to regret it by morning. Others described deep resentment at being crowded, even when it helped. You understand both sides intimately now. Warmth feels good. Space feels safe. Winter demands you compromise between them. You adjust your bedroll to minimize drafts between bodies, careful not to trap moisture. Condensation builds faster with shared heat, and dampness is a quiet enemy. You angle scarves, loosen collars slightly, let breath escape upward rather than soaking fabric. This is advanced cold management, the kind nobody teaches until you've already messed it up once. A light joke slips through your thoughts. Nothing builds community faster than shared suffering, especially when everyone smells the same. You don't laugh out loud, wasted heat, but the humor softens the edge of proximity. It's easier to be close when you don't take it too seriously. Conversation, if it happens at all, is minimal. A comment about the weather lying again. A muttered observation about how coffee tastes better when it's cold enough to hurt. 3 words, maybe 4. That's plenty. Cowboys often used humor sparingly at night, knowing laughter burned energy but also knowing silence could stretch too tight. You balance it instinctively. The wind shifts again, but now it feels less personal. With bodies closed, the air eddies differently, breaking up the worst of the chill. You realize how much of winter survival is about microclimates, tiny pockets of tolerable conditions carved out of something hostile. Together, you make one. There's also accountability in company. You're less likely to let yourself slip into dangerous lethargy when someone else is there to notice. Frostbite loves solitude. Hypothermia prefers quiet. Shared space interrupts both. You check your hands and feet again, not just for yourself, but because you know someone would do the same if you missed it. Historians still argue whether the cowboy code of independence discouraged men from seeking help too often. Some accounts suggest pride cost lives. Others argue self-reliance prevented dependence that could also be fatal. Lying here now, you suspect the truth sits between. The best cowboys knew when to stand alone and when to lean in. You think about how this balance shaped the culture later mythologized as rugged individualism. The stories focus on solitary figures against vast landscapes, but they skip the nights like this: quiet, practical, shared. Winter strips away myth faster than summer ever could. It leaves only what works. Sleep comes a little easier with others nearby. Not deep, not luxurious, but steadier. The night's sounds feel filtered through a buffer of human presence. When you wake briefly, it's to familiar movements rather than imagined threats. That matters more than you'd like to admit. At one point, someone shifts closer and you feel the warmth spike briefly, then settle. You adjust in response, careful not to crowd. It's a negotiation conducted without words, refined by necessity. You realize this is the same negotiation you've been having with the cold all night. Give a little, take a little, fine balance. Dawn is still far off, but the night no longer feels infinite. Shared endurance shortens perceived time. Cowboys wrote about this effect, how long nights felt shorter when broken into communal moments. Shared coffee, shared jokes, shared watchfulness. You experience it now, the hours smoothing out. As the sky begins its slow, imperceptible shift toward morning, you take inventory again. You're tired, cold, yes, but stable. Fingers responsive, toes aching but alive. The decision to share warmth hasn't erased discomfort, but it's reduced risk. That's the real metric. Pride hasn't vanished, it's just quieter, it's learned something. Independence doesn't mean isolation. Out here, survival isn't a solo performance, it's an ensemble, even when the cast is small. You tuck that lesson away, knowing winter will ask about it again. You settle back, breathing slow, letting the shared warmth do its quiet work. The plains remain vast and indifferent, but for this stretch of night, you've carved out a human-sized answer to them. And that, more than any myth, is how cowboys made it through winter nights on the open plains. Morning never sneaks in politely. It arrives gradually, brushing darkness aside with pale, hesitant light that turns snow and frost into fragile silver. You wake slowly, body stiff, joints protesting after hours of frozen stillness. Every movement is deliberate, a negotiation between desire to rise and the risk of losing heat too fast. Winter teaches patience at every level: sleep, movement, even thinking. One mainstream historical fact: cowboys on the plains often rose before sunrise, not because of discipline, but because daylight was precious for checking cattle, assessing weather, and packing up before conditions worsened. You feel the weight of that reality now, aware that any delay comes at a cost. Morning doesn't wait for comfort. The horse shifts, impatient, signaling the same understanding. Its breath fogs in the cold air, forming miniature clouds that disappear almost as quickly as they appear. You stretch carefully, feeling the slow return of circulation to your extremities. Hands first. Fingers move with effort, then ease. Feet next. Toes respond, and you flex them against the frozen earth. Small victories, but critical ones. Survival depends on noticing these. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some cowboys drank a mug of cold water first thing in the morning as a test of endurance. The reasoning was part superstition, part habit, part genuine attempt to gauge body resilience after long nights. Historians still debate whether such rituals helped more than hindered survival, but the fact that men adhered to them speaks volumes about frontier psychology. You resist the urge to try it, opting instead for coffee, hot and slightly bitter, bringing warmth back to your core. You sit on the edge of your bedroll, taking stock. Clothing is damp from sweat and snow. Layers are compressed. Wool holds heat unevenly. Leather stiffens in the cold. You make micro adjustments, loosening scarves, airing gloves, flipping blankets. These small movements are necessary, even if tedious. Cowboys called this waking the body. A minute of discomfort now is far better than an hour later when the cold insists more aggressively. The plains are quiet but alive in subtle ways. Snow reflects light oddly, Trees, scarce as they are, cast long shadows. Ice glints where water pooled yesterday. You notice these details because they matter: footing, hazard assessment, orientation. Cowboys had to observe constantly because the environment offered no second chances for ignorance. Historians still argue whether detailed observation was taught formally or simply acquired through repetition. But tonight, repetition has done its work. Breakfast is next. Not lavish beans and bacon again, warmed over embers or cold depending on resources, but the act itself has ritual power. Eating restores not just calories but confidence. You sip coffee, fingers warming around the tin cup. Steam rises in lazy spirals, carrying aroma into the still air. It's comfort, yes, but also strategic. Hot liquid spreads warmth to extremities faster than clothing alone. Cowboys relied on this instinctively. The horse receives its own breakfast. You break frozen grass where possible, offer feed if you have it, water if it isn't frozen solid. The animal eats deliberately and you watch with satisfaction. Partnership is reinforced each morning, a silent contract renewed. Some nights the horse wakes first. Some mornings you do. Either way, the routine persists. A light joke drifts through your mind as you watch it nibble. If only humans were as efficient at surviving mornings as horses. You chuckle quietly, conserving warmth, aware that humor keeps morale elevated without wasting calories. Humor, after all, was as vital as any layer of clothing or ration of food. You pack your bedroll, rolling it tight, testing that nothing has frozen through. Saddle follows, cinched, leathers rubbed supple from last night's cold. Every motion is intentional. Efficiency is a survival skill. Cowboys treated packing as seriously as riding. Mistakes here meant discomfort, wasted energy, and sometimes risk. The snow from the storm glitters in the morning light, softening into familiar shapes. Footprints of animals you didn't notice last night crisscross the white, silent testimonies to life out here. You trace some lightly, curious who passed through, careful not to expend unnecessary energy. Each observation reinforces awareness, knowledge accumulated minute by minute, night by night. Winter teaches humility and attentiveness simultaneously. You check your horse one last time, brushing frost from its mane, feeling warmth radiate through the contact. Shared presence overnight has preserved more than comfort. It's preserved readiness. Some cowboys swore that a horse's morning demeanor was a direct indicator of the night's difficulty. You don't rely fully on superstition, but there's truth in observation. By now, the first hint of sun peaks above the horizon, coloring the plains with muted gold. It's weak, almost apologetic, but it carries hope. Winter nights may be long, unrelenting, and full of unseen challenges, but they end. Sunrise marks a reset, a chance to consolidate, to prepare, to keep living. You rise fully, shoulders stiff but spirits intact, ready to face the day, strengthened by endurance and the night's hard-earned lessons. Historians still argue whether the true skill of cowboys lay more in riding, shooting, or surviving nights like this. You know the answer: it's all of it. Survival is cumulative. Preparation, observation, patience, and humor compound into resilience. And mornings like this one are the reward for consistency. By mid-morning, the plains have shifted subtly. Snow glints under the sun, though the day remains bitterly cold. You move deliberately, boots crunching over the frost-hardened ground. Each step is measured, quick enough to maintain warmth, slow enough to avoid slipping on ice hidden beneath snow. The lessons of last night are fresh, etched into muscle memory. One mainstream historical fact: cowboys often spent winter days repairing fences, checking cattle, and maintaining gear precisely because movement helped maintain body heat and prevented frostbite. Out here, labor isn't just productive, it's preventative. You find yourself grateful for that rhythm, even as muscles protest. Activity is survival. You glance at your horse, which follows your lead but grazes intermittently. Partnership remains intact, the silent communication developed over countless nights still unbroken. Cowboys relied heavily on nonverbal cues when riding or camping, because sound travels unpredictably across the plains. You adjust your reins slightly, letting the animal know you're watching, that the pace is yours to set, but collaboration remains essential. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some cowboys would smear a thin layer of lard or tallow on their hands before working in extreme cold, creating a protective barrier against chapping and frostbite. Historians still debate how widespread or effective this practice was, but anecdotal evidence suggests it offered both warmth and skin preservation. You flex your hands and imagine the layers of preparation embedded in these practices, practical, sometimes crude, always intentional. You set to work clearing ice from water troughs left near the edge of a corral. Every movement is careful, deliberate. Water itself is a constant challenge. Frozen overnight, tricky to access, yet essential. The cold bites, but experience tempers frustration. You've learned to pace yourself, to conserve energy for when it truly matters. Winter favors strategy over brute force. As you scoop ice and feed the animals, you notice the wind picking up again. It's subtle, a whisper first, then a thin hiss across open surfaces. That early morning lull was deceptive. The plains don't forgive negligence. You adjust your scarf, tighten the jacket around your torso, and prepare mentally. The cold isn't just temperature, it's an opponent, testing resolve and observation. Historians still argue whether cowboys relied more on experience or instinct during sudden shifts in weather. Diaries suggest both, with veteran cowboys boasting of honed intuition and younger men following prescribed routines. You feel that blend now, instinct guiding you while learned practices provide structure. That combination ensures survival, even when conditions seem arbitrary. A light joke creeps in. You wonder if the snow enjoys playing games, hiding ice, whispering wind just to see which cowboy slips first. Humor, even faint, keeps spirits aligned with endurance. It's not bravado, it's mental sustenance. You continue working, chuckling softly under your breath. Lunch is simple, carried from last night's ration. A small slab of cured meat, a portion of bread, and coffee reheated over embers. The act of eating outside the protective cocoon of your bedroll feels more deliberate, more satisfying. Calories matter more now, cold draws from you relentlessly. You savor every bite, mindful of both warmth and energy. Cowboys understood that nutrition was survival, not luxury, especially in prolonged winter. You glance toward the horizon. Tracks from last night's wildlife are clearer in the morning light. Rabbits, coyotes, perhaps deer, they crisscross your path, reminding you the plains teem with life even when it seems silent. You study patterns, noting distances and directions. Observation is instinctual now. It's both precaution and curiosity, a duality all cowboys maintain. Your horse shifts under the sun, shaking off frost from its coat. You brush it quickly, fingers cold but dexterous, removing the worst of accumulated ice. Care of the animal isn't just duty, it's survival. A healthy, alert horse is the difference between safe passage and danger when the next night arrives. Historians still argue whether equine attention surpassed human vigilance in frontier conditions, but out here both are indispensable. Midday shadows stretch as the sun arcs low. The cold doesn't lessen, but activity keeps the blood flowing. You make mental notes for tonight. Bedroll arrangement, clothing adjustments, food rationing. Preparation isn't optional. It's the silent framework of every night survived. You revisit learned practices, almost ritualistically, ensuring no detail is overlooked. A quirky thought flits through your mind. Imagine cowboys in future centuries watching snow fall on plains, imagining horses and humans battling together in a frozen choreography. You smirk. History and imagination intertwine in strange ways, especially when survival hones the mind to notice patterns others miss. By late afternoon, fatigue sets in despite constant movement. You shift attention between tending the horse and managing your own energy. Awareness remains sharp: wind, temperature, animal behavior, but the body whispers its limits. Cowboys had no choice but to heed these whispers. Ignoring them risked frostbite, missteps, or worse. You obey, slowing pace, allowing small pauses to stretch and warm. Historians still debate how much overexertion contributed to winter casualties among cowboys. Diaries are full of anecdotes about collapsing from exhaustion or underestimating cold after intense labor. Tonight, reflection reinforces caution. Momentum is necessary, but vigilance surpasses brute speed. As evening approaches, you finish tasks with a sense of accomplishment tempered by anticipation. Nightfall will return, and with it, old challenges: cold, darkness, uncertainty. Preparation and mindfulness are the only shields. You glance at your horse, noticing a flick of the tail, a subtle acknowledgement of the day's work. Mutual understanding doesn't need words. Survival speaks louder. The plains darken slowly, snow shadows stretching. You feel ready not just physically but mentally. Nights like this teach patience, observation, adaptation. The winter landscape isn't hostile only, it's instructive. You remember each lesson, each habitual adjustment, each precaution. They aren't arbitrary, they are survival distilled into practice. Finally, you pause, letting the horse graze, letting the cold seep without panic. You breathe deliberately, mind tracing last night's strategies, tomorrow's adjustments, and tonight's anticipated challenges. The cycle continues. Cowboys lived within it, learning constantly, adapting quietly, humor intact where possible, pride tempered by reality. You tuck your gloves back into layers, check the saddle, and survey the open plain. The day has been endured. The night approaches, carrying the same truths you've practiced: preparation, attention, partnership, and patience. You step toward evening with experience in your bones and lessons in your mind, ready for the cold's next interrogation. Evening falls gradually, the pale light fading into a deep, almost tangible blue. Shadows stretch long across the snow, and every detail sharpens as the cold intensifies. You pause for a moment, boots pressing into frost, inhaling the crisp air, letting your body recalibrate. This is the moment cowboys knew well, the transition from day's labor to night's vigilance. Preparation now will dictate whether tonight becomes endurance or ordeal. One mainstream historical fact: cowboys often started night routines well before darkness fully claimed the plains, ensuring clothing, bedding, and animal care were ready before the cold deepened. Efficiency and foresight weren't optional, they were survival tools. You go through motions practiced countless nights, checking your horse, brushing frost from mane, tightening saddles, arranging blankets and bedrolls. Your horse senses the shift too, ears flicking, muscles tensing slightly. You note posture, breath, tail flicks. Partnership is active now, a silent communication honed by hours of shared experience. Historians still debate whether this animal-human synchronicity was instinctual, learned, or a mixture of both, but it saves lives. You adjust your stance, angle your body, mirror its alertness. Together you prepare. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some cowboys believed that whispering to their horse before nightfall kept the animal calmer and possibly warmer. Whether psychological or magical, you don't argue with tradition. You murmur a soft word, feeling the reassurance radiate outward. Humor surfaces too. If the horse responds with a judgmental snort, that's one less complaint you'll hear tonight. Food comes next. Dinner is modest: cold beans, hardtack, and perhaps a slice of bacon. The act itself is a ritual, a preparation for endurance rather than pleasure. Calories are precious, warmth is precious, and both must be distributed carefully across body and night. You eat slowly, noticing every bite, every sensation, letting heat bloom from within. Cowboys called this feeding the fire inside, metaphorical but accurate. Historians still argue about the exact composition of winter rations, but beans and fat appear consistently across diaries. The wind shifts suddenly, a low whistle sliding through distant hills. Snow whispers in response, dancing in fine swirls over the plains. You adjust your scarf, pull your coat closer, make micro movements that matter more than grand gestures. Survival is in details. Each adjustment preserves warmth, maintains energy, and keeps fear at bay. You note these shifts mentally, cataloging for later. The first stars appear, pinpricks of sharp cold against the night. They are indifferent, silent witnesses. Out here, celestial navigation is practical. Stars serve as guides, orientation markers, even psychological anchors. Cowboys memorized constellations not for beauty, but for movement and distance, night after night. You glance upward, tracing familiar patterns, feeling an odd sense of calm. Historians still argue how accurate frontier navigation truly was without instruments, but accuracy often depended on observation, repetition, and instinct. Night tasks are ongoing. securing gear, checking the horse, arranging bedrolls. Each action is deliberate, conserving calories and optimizing heat retention. You adjust blankets so that airflow doesn't leach warmth yet doesn't trap moisture. Your gloves come off briefly to check the horse's coat, hands stiff but responsive. These micro movements are survival literacy. Missing one detail could compromise hours of effort. A light joke surfaces as you finish. If anyone sees this dance of motion and patience, they'd call it madness, but it's method, honed over countless nights. Humor is a subtle shield against the creeping monotony and subtle panic of the cold. You allow yourself a small smirk, enough to ease tension without wasting heat. You settle beside your horse, curling inward. Positioning tonight matters. You place your back to the wind, boots tucked, head low. Layers trap warmth effectively now. Awareness remains active. Sleep is shallow but restorative. Listening continues. Distant animal calls, shifting snow, subtle ice cracks. Each is noted, each accounted for. Historians still debate how much of frontier vigilance was instinct versus learned habit, but your experience suggests both. The horse shifts, nudging lightly against your hip. You adjust, finding comfort in proximity without crowding. Shared presence multiplies warmth and morale. Lying here, you reflect on lessons: preparation, observation, rationing, partnership, humor, and patience. All converge in nightly survival. The cold remains merciless, but these practices hold it at bay. The wind gusts briefly, shaking loose flakes from distant trees. You respond automatically, tightening layers, adjusting posture, maintaining vigilance. Winter is relentless, and you respect its lessons. The night stretches, still long, but you feel armed with knowledge, habit, and quiet courage. You and the horse form a small, enduring unit against the indifferent plains. Finally, you close your eyes, letting the mind wander just enough to rest while ears remain alert. The plains remain vast, cold, and unforgiving, but preparation and attention turn them into a landscape you can endure. Tonight, like countless before, you adapt, persist, and survive. Night deepens, cold settling into every crevice of the landscape, but also into your bones. You adjust your posture again, testing the balance between warmth retention and circulation. Every inch of exposed skin is a liability. Every layer of clothing, every fold of blanket, every shared breath from your horse matters. The plains teach precision, not heroics. This is the long game. One mainstream historical fact: cowboys often spent hours through the night checking their surroundings, not moving far but remaining alert. Snow-covered plains can conceal sudden drops, patches of thin ice, or wildlife moving silently. Observation is survival. You remain still but watchful, muscles coiled like springs, senses attuned to the subtlest variations. The night is alive and it listens too. You hear it first as a faint crunch, then another. A small animal, likely a rabbit or fox, moving close by. You barely move, letting your body remain a shadow in the snow. The horse flicks an ear, shifts slightly, but stays calm. You allow yourself a quiet chuckle. Survival involves both vigilance and restraint. Historians still argue whether tracking such minor signals materially affected cowboy survival or was more a psychological exercise, but you notice it sharpens your awareness, sharpens your mind. The wind whispers again, soft but insistent. Snow flurries swirl, brushing against your layers, drifting across the horse's back. You tuck your scarf higher, adjust gloves, reposition your bedroll. Every small adjustment accumulates into survival. Cowboys knew this intuitively. Modern analyses highlight that incremental strategies often determine outcomes more than grand gestures. You embody that principle now. A quirky tidbit: some cowboys claim they could tell the difference between the scent of approaching snow and the scent of predators. Whether myth, exaggeration, or early science, it adds a layer to observation. You sniff the air consciously, half expecting some subtle signal, half appreciating the humor in such rituals. Humor remains an understated weapon against fatigue and fear. Your thoughts drift briefly, considering how time stretches in winter nights. Hours blend, minutes lose shape. Sleep is fragmented. The mind alternates between vigilance and shallow rest. You count breaths, measure silence, note sounds. These little mental exercises preserve sanity. Cowboys didn't have formal manuals for such techniques, but oral tradition and repetition created robust routines. Historians still debate how consciously such routines were maintained versus habituated instinct. You glance at your horse, chest rising and falling steadily. Even in the harshest conditions, the animal exhibits endurance without complaint. You admire the simplicity of that resilience, understanding how much humans can learn from it. Partnership isn't just functional, it's instructive. The animal mirrors what you cannot ignore: awareness, adaptability, and patience. You think about the fire you didn't light, remembering the last storm. Heat is valuable, yes, but smoke, maintenance, and wind exposure are liabilities. Cowboys mastered the art of balancing minimal heat generation with maximal preservation. Out here, you follow that lesson, relying on clothing layers, body position, and proximity to your horse. Survival is calculated, never theatrical. A small joke flits across your mind. If the horse judges your night shift performance, it's polite enough to keep it to itself. Humor like this softens tension, preserves morale, and burns minimal calories. You settle further, curling around your core warmth, feeling the quiet companionship extend beyond utility into trust. Snow shifts under the wind's occasional gusts. You test the bedroll and blankets again, making micro adjustments, aware that moisture accumulation is subtle but dangerous. Frost forms silently, often unnoticed until it steals heat aggressively. Cowboys' diaries frequently mention vigilance against condensation and ice buildup. Small mistakes can compound into life-threatening conditions. The night's silence returns. You allow a fragment of mental wandering, replaying lessons: how to layer clothing, ration calories, position the horse, interpret wind, read snow patterns. Repetition has made the knowledge almost instinctive. It is comforting. It is life-saving. Historians still argue whether survival skill was more reliant on observation, learned habit, or innate intuition. You recognize it as a combination. Tonight, experience carries authority. Awareness and adaptation merge seamlessly. Humor, observation, patience, and preparation, the cornerstones of enduring the plains, form the framework for the next hours, long before dawn's hesitant light touches the horizon again. The wind dies down temporarily, snow flurries thinning to quiet drift. Your attention relaxes fractionally, though never completely. The night remains long, indifferent, demanding vigilance, but also predictable in its own patterns. You exhale slowly, letting awareness, experience, and trust in preparation ease tension, even as the cold presses on. The plains remain vast, silent, and expectant, but you endure, steady and present. The last stretch of night presses in with its slow, relentless weight. Hours of listening, adjusting, and shivering accumulate into something tangible, a rhythm of endurance. You move only when necessary, shifting just enough to stave off numbness, flexing fingers and toes as if rehearsing life itself. Every breath you take is deliberate, warming air carried deep into your lungs. Every heartbeat a quiet reminder, still alive, still enduring. One mainstream historical fact anchors this. Cowboys on the plains frequently credited their survival to constant, small adjustments rather than dramatic actions. Shifting layers, repositioning blankets, micromanaging posture, and adjusting the horse's stance were all survival strategies honed over repeated nights. You perform these tasks instinctively, each movement learned through experience and observation. You hear a distant coyote, yipping once, then vanishing into the night. The sound startles briefly, but you resist the urge to rise fully. Snow muffles movement, and every unnecessary motion wastes precious heat. You count heartbeats between yips, noting direction, intensity, and pattern. Historians still debate whether cowboys' auditory vigilance materially affected survival rates, but here, every sound matters. The horse shifts closer, nudging your hip. The warmth spreads subtly, grounding you. Partnership continues to be your greatest asset, offering both physical comfort and psychological reassurance. You murmur a quiet word of acknowledgement. Some cowboys swore that animals could sense impending weather changes before humans did. Whether true or not, you accept it as useful intuition. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Certain cowboys would carry small scraps of bacon grease or dried meat in shirt pockets to consume if the night dragged long and calories ran low. The idea of eating raw fat in the cold might seem grotesque, but the body's need for energy outweighs culinary sensibilities. You check your supplies mentally, appreciating the careful rationing of last night and today. Snow drifts slowly across your bedroll, sculpted by occasional gusts. You brush it aside just enough to maintain insulation, careful not to overexpose layers. Moisture management remains critical. Wetness steals heat more efficiently than cold. Cowboys' journals are full of terse notes on frost accumulation, condensation, and how small misjudgments could compromise hours of careful preparation. You attend to these details with methodical care. Your mind wanders briefly to humor, imagining future listeners imagining this night, counting snowflakes, shivering alongside you, or envying your horse's coat. Laughter is impractical in the cold but comforting in thought. Humor has survived centuries of cowboys for a reason. It is quiet resistance to monotony and fear. The wind picks up slightly again, whistling over frozen plains, rattling branches far off. You pull your scarf higher, adjust gloves, shift slightly to reposition your core warmth. Awareness and preparation are now second nature, executed automatically, instinctively. Survival has trained your body and mind alike. You note micro details: frost building at sleeve edges, subtle chill creeping into boots, faint crunches from wildlife nearby. Each cue carries weight. Historians still argue whether cowboys overestimated danger from wildlife at night. Anecdotes vary widely, but vigilance was rarely wasted. You remain attentive, aware that small creatures can herald larger threats or simply indicate patterns of activity across the plains. Observation remains the silent backbone of endurance. Time becomes amorphous. Minutes stretch into hours. Your body shivers intermittently despite layers and proximity to the horse. You allow shallow dozing while remaining alert, alternating between brief rest and micro adjustments. This oscillation is the pattern of survival, the unglamorous reality of enduring winter nights on the open plains. A final light joke surfaces in thought. If endurance were an Olympic sport, you'd already be on the podium for adjusting gloves while shivering. Humor, tiny and quiet, cushions the relentlessness. You embrace it, letting it pass through like a whisper, gentle but essential. Gradually, the eastern sky hints at pale light, distant and indirect. Dawn approaches, not abruptly but steadily, softening the night's harsh edges. You feel the accumulated knowledge of the hours, calories consumed, body heat preserved, horse tended, vigilance maintained, coalesce into quiet triumph. You've survived again. That, more than comfort or warmth, is the reward. The first real light of morning stretches across the plains, thin and hesitant, washing snow and frost in pale gold. You breathe slowly, letting the cold air fill your lungs, testing the response of every finger and toe. Night's vigilance lingers, a muscle memory in the bones. You shift, stretching slowly, careful to avoid numbing muscles, aware that the day is a continuation of survival, not a pause. Winter doesn't care about your schedule. One mainstream historical fact: cowboys often rose with the sun or slightly before to check livestock, repair fences, and prepare for travel, because daylight was precious and temperatures rarely improved later. You know this routine instinctively now, feeling the rhythm of early hours embedded in your actions. Every movement, from brushing snow off the horse to rearranging blankets, is deliberate, protective, and efficient. The horse snorts softly, stamping a hoof. You pat its neck, acknowledging the partnership that has carried you through long nights. Animals were indispensable allies, often as crucial as skill, knowledge, or courage. Historians still argue whether human ingenuity or animal intuition saved more lives on winter plains, but you feel the truth in the combination. Together, you endure. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you survey the snowy landscape. Some cowboys claim that singing softly to themselves or their horse helped maintain rhythm and morale during long nights. You hum a faint, almost imperceptible tune, feeling the warmth of subtle motion and vibration. Humor and song, even faint, act as small shields against isolation, monotony, and cold. You smile quietly at the thought: If anyone else heard it, they'd think madness, but out here, it's practical. Snow crunches underfoot as you move deliberately, scanning tracks left by wildlife overnight. Rabbits, coyotes, foxes, each mark tells a story. You trace patterns without pursuit, cataloging observations for both curiosity and caution. The plains are alive in subtle ways, and attentive cowboys learn to read these signs as a vital component of survival. Historians still debate how reliably these readings predicted danger, but attention itself is protective. Breakfast is modest: leftover beans, a small slab of dried meat, and reheated coffee. You eat slowly, savoring warmth and sustenance. Calories now are more than fuel, they are armor against the cold's ongoing assault. You measure each bite, noting comfort and temperature, integrating nutrition into your survival routine. Micro practices matter more than grand gestures. The wind has shifted from night's relentless gusts to a gentler, teasing breeze, enough to hint at movement but not to challenge layers and vigilance. You make final micro adjustments: gloves, scarf, hat, saddle straps. Moisture is minimal now, snow settled, but preparation remains key. The night's lessons are still present in your muscles, spine, and awareness. Winter is relentless, but you have adapted. Humor surfaces again, a tiny quip about imagining the plains as a personal training ground, sculpted by wind, frost, and vigilance. You smirk quietly, understanding that mental resilience is inseparable from physical endurance. Laughter, even silent, is an armor of its own. Your eyes follow the horizon. The sun is climbing slowly, illuminating distant ridges, softening shadows, revealing textures you could not see at night. You note the quality of snow, the angle of light, subtle patterns in frost. Observation is continuous. Cowboys carried these mental maps constantly, refining them over nights and days. Awareness, adaptation, and patience compound across time into a kind of instinctive knowledge. Historians still argue whether solitary nights or group nights produced more skilled cowboys, but experience suggests both have lessons. Tonight, after sharing warmth, observing the night, and adjusting continuously, you embody both. Vigilance, partnership, humor, routine, and careful attention to detail converge to make survival possible. You stand fully now, stretching deliberately, letting the sun touch your face, feeling residual chill fade into warmth slowly. The plains remain vast and indifferent, but each ridge, hollow, and drift feels slightly more navigable, mapped now by memory and learned instinct. You pat your horse again, whispering a word of thanks, and feel the quiet satisfaction of endurance, the small cumulative triumph of surviving another long night on the open winter plains. Preparations for travel and daily labor await, but the night's trials recede into experience. You walk steadily, observing tracks, shadows, and subtle cues, carrying forward the knowledge and humor that made this night survivable. Winter teaches patience, adaptation, and respect, and rewards quiet diligence. You've endured, you've learned, you've persisted. The plains soften as the sun rises fully, turning the icy white landscape into gentle, reflective silver. The air, still crisp, now feels less threatening, almost comforting. You move slowly, savoring warmth where it exists, letting muscles loosen gradually after the tension of night. Each breath becomes lighter, and with it, the mental weight of constant vigilance lifts. You notice the subtle sounds of morning: wind through distant grass, faint animal calls, the soft crunch of your boots on frost. It all blends into a steady rhythm, a quiet reassurance that life continues despite the harshness of winter. You take a moment to feel the warmth returning to your hands, the sun's weak light touching your face, and the horse's steady presence beside you. Shared endurance fades into quiet gratitude. There is no rush now. The cold has not vanished entirely, but it has been negotiated, accounted for, survived. Humor, observation, and patience, your companions through night, linger in memory, softly humming in the mind. Step by step, you feel the plains as less an adversary and more a teacher, indifferent but honest. The day will bring work, travel, and decisions, but for now, you allow yourself the simple comfort of having endured. You remember the long stretches of dark, the shifting wind, the fragile warmth, and feel steady, grounded, ready. The lessons of observation, partnership, and resilience have crystallized into quiet confidence. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the memory of snow, stars, wind, and horse settle into the edges of your mind. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and allow the plains' rhythm to fade gently into sleep. You survived. You learned. You endured. And now, peace returns to the frozen expanse of imagination, softening the night's edges until dreams carry you forward. Sweet dreams.